morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are located. My name is Gabriela Castro. I am the Executive Director of Global Chamber, Querétaro. Today, we have a very special event, the Mexican mining industry towards ESG. I want to welcome and thank the speakers for participating in this event. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I want to introduce Doug Bronke, who is the president of Global Chamber.
Thank you, Gabriela. I really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. I am the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We started actually just about 7 years ago with the intent of growing business across the world in every market segment. I often mention, our big advantage is that we handle every segment, and our big disadvantage is we handle every segment. It can be a blessing and a curse. The mining industry, however, is one that we do focus in on particularly. It's also one that I've been very blessed to have worked in. I'm a chemical engineer originally, worked for the DuPont company in the chemicals and polymers industry. And when I retired, the first thing I did was become head of sales and marketing for Phelps Dodge, now Freeport-McMoRan. And I got to learn about, certainly from the copper side of things, molybdenum, all of the byproducts out of those processes, including gold and silver, rhenium, and other things. And so I got, I think, a better appreciation for the mining industry. Through that period, we also worked with FUMEC. And what I learned was that 70% of exploration in Mexico for mining is foreign companies, but there are many, many opportunities locally in Mexico, and many different companies, like for control rooms and electronics and all sorts of analysis for mining that are in Mexico. So the industry there is growing, and I look forward to learning more about those opportunities, as I'm sure everyone else is. So Gabriela, thank you for putting this on today, and we at Global Chamber support you, and we also appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. It's my pleasure. I want to introduce also the executive directors of Guanajuato and Sonora. We made a team to organize this event. So Arturo Samarripa is the executive director of Global Chamber, Guanajuato. Good morning, Arturo.
Good morning, Gabriela. Good morning, Doug. Everybody, this is a pleasure. And this is not the first event that we have done together. We have worked before, and it's always a new experience. Every time we have different topics. I'm so glad to have a team like the one we have right now. I am in Central Mexico. I will leave my information in the chat. If you want to contact me, please feel free to send a message and we can connect. Thank you for the introduction, Gabriela, and we will be here. Central Mexico is very rich in mining, in the mining industry. And I'm excited to hear what the panelists have to say, because this is a trending topic, as Doug mentioned. Thank you, Gabi.
Thank you. Now I am introducing the Executive Director of Global Chamber, Sonora, Cristian Aguirre.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be joining you here. I'm Cristian Aguirre. I represent the chapter in Hermosillo, Sonora, and also the area of Northwest Mexico. As we know, also Sonora is a state that is rich in the mining process, especially one of them being copper and gold, silver, and many, many other materials. So this was a great event to be joining, and we thank Gabriela for all the organization of this wonderful event, and looking forward to even learning more about the other states and their production. And we are here to support in anything necessary, and we are located just a few miles from the border to the United States. So we are close also to headquarters, which are located in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristian. Now I will introduce our speakers. And I will ask the speakers to introduce themselves, please. Alberto Orozco, the president of the mining cluster in Sonora and CEO and director of Capitan Mining. Welcome, Alberto. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Gabriela. It's great to be here. Just a brief introduction about myself. Like you mentioned, I'm CEO of Capitan Mining, which is a junior mining exploration company trading in the Toronto Stock Exchange and exploring for precious metals in Durango, Mexico. We're only a year old, just over a year old, so we're a relatively new company. But I'm also the president of the Sonora mining cluster, which, I was just learning that the Global Chamber is 7 years old. The cluster is only 6 years old, but it's great to be making a difference in the mining sector. What we do in the cluster in Sonora as our purpose is try to improve the business environment in the region to promote business, particularly on the providing end of the spectrum, and always trying to have everything surrounded by the sustainability aspect. I've been in this industry since I started university back in the mid-90s, as a intern in different mining companies. So I've seen a couple of cycles now, and I think that gives me an interesting perspective to comment on how things have been changing for the last 20 years. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto. Ana Mallen is a senior ESG consultant at Endeavor Silver. Welcome, Ana. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
No, Gabriela, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with all of you and my colleagues, Daniel and Alberto, especially. Well, yes, I'm the sustainability advisor for Endeavor Silver. Endeavor Silver currently holds 4 assets in Mexico, one in Durango, another in Zacatecas, Guanajuato, and Jalisco. With the Jalisco property actually being a project in development. So it's an exciting time, I think, to be operating in Mexico. I'll introduce myself briefly. I have been working in the extractive industry for over 11 years, both in mining and in oil and gas. My specialty is corporate responsibility, and my specialty is setting up ESG systems that actually work in the field so that you can properly report on them. Again, thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you, Ana. And Daniel Santamaría, Vice President of Minera Gorrión, subsidiary of Almaden Minerals. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Gabi. Thank you. Thanks to everyone. Well, I'm a geologist. I'm an exploration geologist. That's how I started with this. I never thought I was going to be talking about ESG at any stage of my professional career, but it seems like obviously this is a natural path that the industry is following for many, many years. And it's a pleasure to be here to share some of my ideas and some of the things that we have experienced through Minera Gorrión. We are a junior company that does exploration all throughout Mexico. We have different projects in different stages, but the most important one being Ixtaca project in the state of Puebla, which is an advanced exploration and in development into a mining project. Is going to be the first operating large metal mining in the state, which has obviously be quite a challenge for the ESG kind of purposes. So I'll be happy to kind of talk a little bit more of what we're doing there right now. Thank you very much, Gabi, for the invitation.
Thank you, Daniel. Interesting. Thank you very much for introducing yourself. I will give you in a minute some hard numbers, and after we will begin with the discussion on ESG. According to the National Institute of Statistics and Geography in Mexico, in 2020, mining metallurgical production amounted to $13 billion, and the share of mining metallurgical GDP was 1.74% of the country's total. According to the Ministry of Economy, there are 345 mining companies operating 10% of the national territory through concessions granted by the Mexican government. 188 are foreign-owned companies registered, led by Canada with 132, USA 19, China 8, Australia 7, Japan 4, South Korea 4, France 3, among others. Maybe these numbers about Canada, 133 is not by chance that the three of you are working for Canadian companies in Mexico. So I would like to discuss on, maybe you can describe what the ESG programs you have in the company that you are working for. Who wants to begin?
I can begin if that's okay.
Sure.
My colleagues here in the panel, and thank you again for the invitation. It's great to be here. I have to say that, again, I wear two hats, so I have to comment on the two fronts of both the company and the cluster, which I think are both interesting, perhaps to the viewers. I think first with the exploration side, it's probably challenging for exploration companies to think early on about ESG, because the very early days are all about, you know, finding the funds to go and explore, to finding the deposit. Typically, you know, or at least in the last years or in the history of exploration, most community efforts would focus on getting access to the land to do the exploration, maybe do a little bit of remediation of drill pads, etc. There's not a big impact when you're doing exploration. But I believe there's a very big missed opportunity when exploration companies come into a new area and focus only on the geology. I think that nowadays we have to broaden that scope of exploration, and we have to bring in the expertise to also understand the social and environmental challenges and opportunities that a region might offer, and include them as part of the exploration process. That's what we've been trying to do here with Capitan at an early stage. Again, we're only a year old, but I think we've been doing good progress in trying to take from the beginning the opportunity to explore not just the rocks, but also the people and the environmental opportunities. Because we know that if we are successful with the geology, we don't want to be starting late with understanding that part of a project. And on the clusters part, there's actually a big ESG catalog of things that we do. But I would say this, we try to wrap everything in one transparency of our members, which include both the producing companies and the providers, as well as universities and government, all sitting on the same table, on the same organization, which is the Sonora mining cluster. We work through 6 commissions that include sustainability, innovation, communication, safety, etc. And all of these are really focused on improving how we work in our different areas. So we're actually not very technical. We don't have a technical or operational commission that, you know, talks about maybe operational efficiency. Maybe we should, but we don't. And I think that's a sign of the times that companies are really making an effort to improve on their ESG practices. We have a number of events. We have a number of seminars. I don't want to take too much time by mentioning everything in detail, but I will mention that the cluster is an environment where companies, both producing and providers, can come to the table together with government, universities, and in many opportunities with society as well, to try to see how we make mining better, how we make it more responsible, how we think of more long-time sustainable economic development solutions for projects. And we do that through a number of forums and events and roundtables.
Thank you, Alberto. I see that the mining cluster in Sonora does a great job on sustainability and supporting the communities and universities. I follow you all the time in the social network, and
thank you.
You do a great job. So I don't know, maybe Ana, you want to talk about the programs, ESG programs from Endeavor Silver in Mexico or around the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one important thing to point out, and this is an issue, I think, when we talk about ESG generally, is that we have all of these acronyms, right? So we have GRI, and we have SASB, and we have TCFD, and we have the ODS, and then you have this other component called a materiality study, which you're supposed to do at least every 2 years, and so forth. And really, I think that it's important, and I think that Endeavor Silva in particular does this very well, that we don't lose sight of what ESG means. And ESG basically is a means to de-risk a project. So just like Alberto said, whether you're in exploration or you're in operations, or even if you are, in your closure phase, what you are doing when you implement ESG elements, you're not just disclosing, you're not just reporting, but you're actually de-risking, and you're creating value for the company. And I think that, there are 2 different levels in which ESG really needs to be considered. And this is what I believe, again, Endeavor Silver is very good at, is that, there are 4 operating, at this point in time, there are 4 operating business units. And yes, there is a corporate ESG. So obviously there are systems that are built into the company that are made to look at their reporting for a GRI and their monitoring of environmental impacts and social and governance and so forth. But there, and right now there's also a push, obviously, which is now required, I think, for ES, when we talk about ESG generally, to do your disclosure for the task force on climate change financial disclosure, right? This is something also that is part of this process of de-risking, but it's really what you do with that monitoring, right? And how it is that you implement the systems within each one of the different business units. And in the case of Endeavor, it is difficult because, you have a unit in closure, you have 2 units in operation and 1 unit in development. And it's really about how can we begin to develop those systems that are going to de-risk our projects in a way that also creates value for the company, not just internally for the investors, but for the bigger stakeholders. And I hopefully we'll get into this a little bit further. I think we will, because we're talking about Mexico. But creating value now is not just, like I said, about creating value for the company, but about creating value for your external stakeholders. How is it that operating in Mexico as a Canadian mining company, in this case, we can begin to tailor all of our systems and tailor our risks to turn them into opportunities, not just for the company, but for the communities in which we operate, in conjunction with the municipal authorities, in conjunction with the state authorities, in conjunction with the development plans of the regions where we're operating. And I think that it's, when we talk about ESG, this is really where we need to focus on, right? This is the core. So, with other companies that I have worked with, I always have to remind them sometimes, they say, well, we want to do a lot of communication. Well, communication is wonderful, but there has to be substance behind that communication. And it's great to see companies that can really, I would say, embody and embrace the true nature of what ESG actually means for an operation.
Thank you, Ana. It's a very interesting topic, and it's big. I mean, it's non-stop. So Daniel, maybe you can tell us what Minera Gorrión is doing on ESG, that I know that you are really involved on that.
Well, sure. I think that I totally agree with Alberto here. I think that being an exploration company really gives you a great opportunity to initiate with ESG from a good point. Like as you all know, exploration projects are sometimes very rapid. There are quick contacts with community, but at the end also is the first impression that the community is going to get from the industry in general. So it's the first card that you have. If it's all about behavior, and those rapid contacts with the community also could develop into a project later on, such as the project that we have at Ixtaca. So in a community that doesn't have any contact at all with mining operations or with mining in general, it has been quite a challenge, but also an opportunity to develop a lot of instruments. So I'll just share some of them with you. I mean, we always work with a concept that is called metros perforados versus minutos platicados. So basically meters drilled versus minutes talked. So if you drilled 160,000 meters to obtain a resource or to calculate a resource, that means that you actually have to be spending the same amount of time talking to people. The other one is the concept of collective intelligence. So that means that collective intelligence is that we all in the same ground, we know exactly the same information about project. So the community knows exactly where the pit is going to be, where the roads are going to be, all our workers, and I mean everyone, and that starts with the company. Sometimes it's incredible to see that a lot of workers that are there for many years, they don't really know what's going on with the project. I mean, they work there, but they don't really know what they're doing. So that is part of the collective intelligence. The other thing is obviously the cultural relevance and to listen, to adapt ourselves into something that actually works. We work with a concept called social mimetism, which is, I'm just going to give you a quick example. When we started giving some of these community talks, we used to get like 150, maybe 200 people at the most. And there was one person that came to us and said, "Oh, you haven't used the speakerphone to drive around and put a cumbia and a funny, kind of a sound to just be telling people that there's going to be a meeting." So we started using that, and then suddenly we had 700 people there showing up at our door. So obviously adapting, listening to what the community wants, to what the community expects. And I think that Anna is probably pins out very well that at the end of the day, this generates shared value with the community, shared value for the company, and the risk in the project. We in 2007 developed a NEVIS. This is the first step that we had as a formal instrument to do a social evaluation of the project. That gave us, one of the most important aspects was that people was afraid of the tailings dam, that they had problems dealing with the possibility of infiltration to the water and contamination, etc. And so the company decided to make an engineering adaptation to change and to modify the project so that it didn't include a tailings dam. So that means, obviously you have a tool that makes you, go and evaluate socially to the community, but then also the company needing to adapt and to change and to modify its project. In this case, we eliminated the tailings dam by using filter tailings and dry stack. So that was a major change in terms of economics for the project. But obviously, after certain detailed economical studies, the company was able to do it. So these days, we're working on a new human rights impact assessment that elevates the new contact with the community for the further development of the project. So I think that's what we've done in the past. Obviously, sounds simple, but it's been a lot of hours, same as a lot of meters drilled in the Ixtaca project.
Thank you, Daniel. And I love the minutes drilled, minutes talked. Very good. Thank you. And after all what you discussed and what you shared with us, something came to my mind. And I'm thinking, during all the period of the mine, since the first day that you are doing before development, in exploration, until the end of the life of the mine, do you think that the ESG will be changing with the years, since the beginning until the end? How would this happen? Or how would you think that would be the change from the beginning until the end?
If you allow me to comment here, you definitely run that risk, and that has been a reality for probably a large number of projects, not only in Mexico but over the world. And that's also related to the nature of sometimes projects changing hands. Let's not forget that the mining business is a long-term, high-risk business. Sometimes market conditions are in there. Sometimes companies are not able to raise the money. Sometimes companies give priority to other projects, and then at other times, they will decide to sell the asset to other company. Those things happen. and you run that risk in changing between companies over the years, that there won't be a continuity of programs. And that risk is larger if there was no program in the beginning to start with. So if you didn't have anything to go by at the beginning, when the new company comes in, we'll try to do things differently, and then the next one. I think this is something we have to be very aware of, because we're not going to be able to avoid projects changing hands. That's just business, right? That happens. But we have to be very careful with understanding what was done before. If and when possible, try to have continuity with some of the phases, if it's applicable, if it's recommendable for that specific project, because building trust doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes, having a key specific person who has been developing that trust with the community might be important. Some other cases maybe not, but you have to understand each case very specifically, and try to do your best to try to keep continuity of things, and not lose the trust that may have been won by the previous people working on that project.
Great. Yeah, I agree with you, Alberto. It's a long path, and as you say, there are many things that could happen in the middle, and you cannot control that. So you can do the best you can, but you cannot control all that. So anyone else that would like to say something about this?
Yeah. If you'll allow me, Gabriela, with what Alberto has spoken about, there are a lot of, I can't stress enough how important it is when you have mergers and acquisitions, or when you're looking into projects as a mining company. And this is not just something that applies to Mexico. I think, or even just to mining in the extractives, this happens a lot. I can't stress enough how important it is to look at the social elements of ESG when you're doing your due diligence. I find that generally companies will, put a lot of emphasis on the technical side of the project. They will put a lot of emphasis on, some of the environmental systems that, a company may or may not have developed. And there's a lot of awareness on this. But, generally when I have been in this situation, the social element is completely absent, and it's almost an afterthought of, oh, by the way, can you add into the data room for the potential buyers, elements on the social area. And interestingly enough, it's generally the social. When you have your permits, when you have a good technical study, a good feasibility study, it's normally the social that poses the highest risk. And I think Alberto touched on this as well, when we talk about ESG in terms of exploration, and how many opportunities are lost in exploration because some of these elements are not addressed. And I would like to just point out that yes, even if there isn't a merger and acquisition, yes, you're going to have an exploration. Obviously, you have very small environmental impacts compared to what you're going to have during operations. And then obviously the remediation that you're going to have to do in closure. So yes, some of these elements are going to change. But I do think that it's important, and I don't see this quite often, that within exploration, even if there is an intent to sell the project, or there might be a company further on that actually wants to develop the project and operate it, that there are elements that you begin to lay down. Even before you do your environmental impact assessment, if you begin to develop systems, something as simple as a functioning grievance mechanism, or a stakeholder engagement plan, right? Identification of your stakeholders, just these very basic elements. We're not reinventing the wheel here, right? And for example, when we look at Endeavor Silver and this project that they're developing in Jalisco, this is exactly what they're doing. Right. So they went into exploration, they did their stakeholder engagement, they did their stakeholder identification. They're working on strengthening that stakeholder engagement. And really developing, again, I can't stress it enough, the systems, because once you develop the system, right, even if there is a takeover, even if there's a merger and acquisition, that system is more viable to actually remain in the hands of the new operators. So for me, I think those are elements that really set the stage. And once you set the expectations of the communities and the authorities and the landowners and all of your different stakeholders, right? This is something that the new operator has to deal with as well. And, and if you've done this well, obviously, then it's something that's going to remain regardless of how many times it changes hands.
If I can add something very quickly too, I think Anna has hit on a really key point, systems. And to complement that, I think also just measurement in general and recording of activities, because again, we're really good at recording, geological information. We make logs, we make maps, we make designs of plans, we design pits and underground, we record our production every day. We know how many tons we produce, etc. But very often there's not a very well established measurement system that tells you, how many people you talk to, and this is going back to also, which is great, the meters versus minutes talked. If you have that way to measure, I think it's great. And then when you have a takeover discussion, you can say, okay, here's my geological data, and here's all my social environmental data as well that we've collected over the years.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just say something up, yeah, so I couldn't agree more with you guys. And something that I kind of thought about many times is that when you drill through a project, you either have a deposit or not. Now you can't change it. If the rock is there or the mineral is there or not. But in terms of the community, there's definitely inputs. You can always try to explain and modify its behavior only just through information. I don't even want to say negative or positive. It's just through information that you're going to get somewhere there. In our case, we've done all sorts of approaches with the community, and we haven't even started the mine. We don't even have a permit to open a mine. So, but we always engage through information. We've taken people to mine tours. We have an open community model every day. We have activities with the community. And, someone will say, well, why would you do that if you don't even have a mine? You're investing all this money. Well, because it's the only way that you have to engage with the community and to generate channels of communication, open channels of communication, constant channels of communication. That's what we want to generate before even starting to have an evaluation source. Obviously, the recording is essential. I totally agree with that, but I think it's important that we also incorporate the progressiveness of all these things. Today, all these concepts of human rights impact assessments, of the due diligence that requires the active engagement with community. I will say that is essential. Like our commitment with the communities always have at least one per day some talk with somebody. I don't care if you have to go down your vehicle being an exploration geologist, descend from your vehicle, take off your hat, take off your glasses, and have a coffee with the person sitting in front of you. I don't care. That is part of the way we operate. And I think that at the end of the day, I don't know if you guys share the same point of view here, but it's a lot of common sense, and ESG and all these new formulas is just a matter of putting this into a protocol. And exploration companies being such a rapid environment where you have to develop this business, what really makes you go further is the protocols that you have implemented, but most importantly, the common sense in engaging, in saying hi, in talking to people, and just making them participant of what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much for your participation. And now, after your answers, tell me, how would you measure ESG? Alberto, maybe?
Sure. Well, there's a number of ways to measure. So, environmental, social, governance. But I think environmental is probably better established than the social part. There are more systems, more measurable things, because they are very often related to permitting. and with making sure that you are complying with the things you have to comply. It includes things like measurement of dust. It includes things like sampling of rivers or lakes. There's a lot of data, I think, that people are more familiarized with collecting. I think that a real challenge is with social. Nowadays, there are systems, there are commercial platforms that you can use. There's a number of them. I'm familiarized with one of them, but I think they are very similar amongst themselves. And what these platforms basically allow you to is to make logs of the information of the different interactions that you have had with the community every day. And you can then extract additional information from that. So you can say, for example, how many minutes you have talked to the people, right? If you want to compare that to your meters drilled, or how many hours, how many interactions you had with which key stakeholder groups, etc. There's also, I think, what we're most familiarized with in mining, particularly at the early stages, or we're in a development phase, is with social baseline studies, which are great also to have and are very important. That's probably what we do most often. But then those tend to be, put in a drawer or something and forgotten for a few years until somebody believes that you have to update that study. Right? I think that it's important to have everyday log of activities that can, and obviously a grievance system as well that should be part of that, so that you make sure that you are not only interacting but interacting effectively, and that you're not only being able to make good of all of your commitments with the communities, but also listen at their grievances and make sure that you have addressed them in a timely manner and that you have addressed them successfully, because you could have a solution that didn't work, and that recording system should be part, that should be included in your system.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto.
Gabriela, I got to tell you, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I get actually this question a lot from people who work with the rating agencies in the extractive sectors, and it's really difficult to try and find what those right indicators are, what it is that we really should be paying attention to. And in part, it's because when you think about ESG standards, we're standardizing, right, across the operations. And I think one of the things that I try to look at and pay attention to is basically the spectrum, right? Because ESG is essentially a spectrum, and where the company lands on the spectrum can differ. Even the business units within the same company can differ. And so you have what I call basic indicators, and Alberto already touched on some of this, right? So we can talk about, for example, water consumption or water quality or monitoring of those elements, which we have to disclose then in our annual report if you're, depending on the standard that you're reporting with. But the question really, to de-risk, remember, this is about de-risking, to de-risk your project. The question you should be asking yourself, and the question that each company, I believe, should have an answer to, is how are you impacting the use of water in the region? Have you created a water census? Is this required by Mexican environmental law? No, we don't have to do this. Is it required by GRE and SASB? No. But should we know what our impact is, on what our water consumption impact or our water quality impact is on the communities, on their, on the municipality, basic services? Yes, we should know that. So, it's that spectrum. If you think about social, yes, we definitely have to have a grievance mechanism. And some grievance mechanisms work, some grievance mechanisms do not. But the question really needs to be, does the community trust you? When we think about social license, right? It's all about trust. Are you a reliable actor within the social landscape? Daniel said it as well, can the community not have you discussed the project with the community? Can the community describe your project? It's a different question.
Sure.
Have they participated? You know, the fact that Daniel just said it, you know, the fact that you have this project and the community comes back and says, you know, well, we don't want a wet tailings, you know, okay, so we'll do a tailings deposit, right? This really speaks to how it is that we're operationalizing your ESG. And in terms of governance, I love this one. Everyone has a code of conduct. It's on everyone's website. I mean, when do we ask our collaborators, when was the last time you used the code of conduct? And can you give me an example, right? So it's the spectrum that we really need to be focusing on. And yes, what we report on in our disclosure and our sustainability reports and all these standards, you know, begin to create the path for companies to disclose, to begin to monitor, to look at those things that are material to their operations, but then it's up to the company and you know, to take it further and really begin to answer these questions that are more complex.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. And I mean, this is just it's a constant evolution of thoughts and ideas towards, you know, ESG. I think ESG naturally needs to evolve continuously. You know, these instruments that Alberto is mentioning, I mean, there are all these websites these days, there are instruments, there are all these, like logging, you know, before logging, for core logging used to be with a piece of paper or an Excel sheet, and you used to record all these angles and the type of rock and all these things. And now you have all the software that are connected to the database, and you can model immediately, and it's rapid. You know, today it's the same thing. We should use all these new instruments, all these new technologies that are available, and also invest, as the same as for the geology, invest in the social instruments that facilitate these things for us as companies, so we're able to report in a better manner. One of the things that I would just like to mention is that we are right now doing an HRAI. This is a human rights impact assessment for the Stacker project, and this is obviously a different step for us. It's elevating the ESG to a different level, obviously, because we are not a project. We don't have a project. It's all an expectation of a project. So this means we are already into negotiation tables with the communities, you know, information, you know, and participation of what is going to happen to the project, gender equality. And one of the important aspects that we have developed also is that we're trying not to stigmatize, you know, not to stigmatize people that are in favor of the mine, that are people are against the mine. You know, how do you do it in an environment that respects human rights, that people are the same? You know, that's a really difficult aspect to cover, because at the end of the day, what we want to achieve, I think, as a company is three aspects. The first of all being that people and communities are autonomous, that they really have a complete autonomy of what they want and what they believe. Self-esteem is the other one, you know, that they are, you know, proud of what they're doing, that they're proud miners, if that's the case. And that at the end of the day, they have an economic independence, that they don't rely entirely on the mining project. I think that with those 3 points, through an ESG program that looks into those things as kind of the main objectives to cover, then that can be obviously distributed socially as however you want or however you can as a company, you know, because some people and some companies do have different resources to cover all these ESG. But, you know, my thinking and my idea is that, you know, it shouldn't be taken as something that you do because you have to. You know, you do it because we're humans, and because we're communities, and because we're all involved here. And I think we should be taking this definitely more seriously, and mining needs to open the door for this. You know, I'm not saying that mining doesn't do it. I just think that mining is definitely one of the probably in the industry that does it the more in compared to oil and gas, for example. But I think we obviously have more opportunities to show that we are the companies that are in the middle of nowhere with communities, with real engagement, and that is an excellent opportunity for ESG.
Sure, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I agree with the three of you, and the social part is very important. All of them are very important, but as Daniel said, we're human beings, so we are supportive to the communities. And my last questions, and after in the meantime, I will ask people who connected, if they can send their questions through the chat while we are talking, the last question that I will ask to the speakers, and that way at the end we can ask the questions to the speakers. There is a concern in the investment community about companies that do greenwashing. That means doing something to look well. What is one of the important things that the company should do in each area of ESG to demonstrate that they are taking ESG seriously?
I think that's a great question. And there probably is greenwashing out there, not just in mining, but in many other industries. I don't think that's the case for most of the sector or the organized sector here. I do see definitely with the different interactions we have with CamiMex and the cluster that there's a true commitment with ESG. I'd say one of the signs that are good in knowing that there's a true ESG commitment is to look if it comes from the top, because that's really one of the things that you have to see to make it successful, really going down the entire organization. Certainly in a country as hierarchical as Mexico, that's very much true as well. But does it come from the top? Do you see a purpose statement? Now some mining companies have purpose statements like Newmont, for example, that are telling not only all of their workforce, but the outside world that part of their purpose of being, it's not just mining and making a profit, but also having a positive impact on their surroundings. I think Anna talked on an important point too, is their substance. And you can see that in companies. Sometimes if there's just communication for communication's sake, but there's really no substance, I think that's something you can see. You can definitely spot it. So I would say those are two of the things that you can observe to know whether a company is really committed with ESG or not.
Thank you, Alberto.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with Alberto. It has to come from the top, and there has to be leadership there, because in trying to make our operations greener, I don't know if that's the correct word, by the way, but we'll use it. It generally requires capital investment. So there has to, we're talking about changing project designs, raising capital for development of projects that use better energy sources, or that have oh my gosh, how to say this, bandas transportadoras,
Conveyor belts.
Conveyor belts, thank you. So that use conveyor belts that use gravity and can even generate electricity. Elements like this really are require that the board, even at the board level, that there is this engagement, right? And we do know that some of the standards, that's why they incorporate why it is, how much involvement from the board level there is on ESG issues. But I think that in Mexico, I would agree with Alberto. I think that most companies are comfortable with making those investments. Our business model allows for it as well, right? Because if we design a good project that is more environmentally conscious, I think I'd rather use that word. It'll be part of our feasibility study, and we will go out and we will raise that money, right? This is what we do. We're used to this in the industry, and so we can put that into the capex for a project, or even operations if we need to. I am actually more concerned that in Mexico we do more blue washing than we do greenwashing. And blue washing really, I don't know if you're all familiar with the term, but it's about how it is that we respond to social impacts, right? Without actually mitigating them. So, and this is, I think, something that is growing in Mexico. We don't necessarily talk about it as blue washing, but when you look at the developments that we are seeing in the past, I would say 5 years, with an extremely active civil society civil society in Mexico no longer talks about ESG. They're talking about human rights impact assessments, right? So this whole focus of what are the impacts that we are as a project generating on the communities? How is it that the communities identify these impacts? What are the potential for violations of human rights in the areas that we operate? These are elements really that have become much more important, I think, than even some of our operating practices. Although they're obviously interrelated, you can't separate one from the other. But I think that it's, that where we're still perhaps as an industry lagging behind is in understanding how it is that we go from this model where we identify impacts to a model where communities identify impacts, stakeholders identify impacts, and then we work collaboratively to be able to mitigate them in a participatory manner.
Good.
Yeah, I think that this collaboration, it's essential. How do we get to that stage? I think that that's the tricky part here onwards. Obviously, in our case, we see a lot of efforts being produced for ESG and all these social evaluations for mitigation purposes. What happens if this happens? But our goal is to prevent the measures. How to prevent any impact, any impact that has been studied, obviously, including environmental impact and also social impact. I mean, this blue washing that Anna mentions, I think is to me, it's today as important as the greenwashing. I mean, for us, I think that the best answer for me will be the fact that we change the entire project. Just to give you an idea, we had, 466 hectares changed to nothing. I mean, to not having an impact. So from having an operating tailings dam to not having a dam at all. That obviously incorporates, cost into energy because it needs to dry the tailings. You actually need to filter them and you need to stack them. And that, I mean, I don't want to throw an exact figure, but you can imagine the cost of doing this was assumed by the company, by all the studies, and then it was communicated to the community that because we listened to what they have to say, we were able to transform and modify the project. That is something that we should be looking at, to do, but it's not an easy concept. Not always you can change it. So if you're not able to change that, then you also have to communicate that. You can say, well, we tried, we looked at different options. So it's a really, again, it's human nature at its best. Communication, taking into consideration to other people, obviously, welcoming always thoughts and criticism from different social NGOs, criticism, media. The world is different and very available today, and we are in the heart of the of the hurricane, so many times. So it's our commitment also to just make sure that all these ESG policies are being followed and that we are in the best disposition to be criticized also, to be criticized and to adapt ourselves into a new world that is rapidly changing.
Thank you for your thoughts. Very interesting. We have two questions. I will only read one. We will not have the time to answer the two. One of them is related to what you just said, but the second one, I will read it to the three of you and whoever wants to respond. What will the mining industry look like in 2050? And are there ways we can move there faster, presuming that the environmental and social side will keep progressing?
It's a really interesting question. If you allow me to, we could spend a couple of webinars just on this topic alone. I think I'm hoping that there will be some big disruptions to mining that are positive for the social and environmental parts. I think in what is very predictable, I think we're going to see more automation of things that could potentially help us have smaller footprints as well as we get automatic equipments to go into areas that maybe humans cannot go safely. So I think that will have an impact, but I definitely see a lot of automation, AI, virtual reality, all of these technologies being more and more implemented into a mining process to make it more efficient, because really mineral deposits are getting deeper, they're getting lower grade, more difficult to mine, and the social license to operate is harder and harder to get. So we need to minimize our footprint. Hopefully we'll see new processes coming into the industry. We have seen innovations in many of these processes like blasting, etc., but we still basically do the same things. We move a lot of rock and process it and put it in another place. I'm hopeful there will be new technologies that will change this. I don't know if by 2050 we'll already have mastered space travel enough to come and bring asteroids back to Earth and get our minerals from there. But that's definitely a discussion that's happening, and it seems to be moving faster in that respect. But again, I think what's very predictable is that we'll be able to reduce our footprints because of automation and better technology. And that, by the way, might require completely new profiles in education and professionals coming into the industry.
No, I couldn't agree with Alberto more. I mean, I agree that we've seen some technological innovations, but I would really like to see something that would shake up the industry. And maybe that is space travel. I think that would be interesting. Unfortunately, no environment, no social elements in space travel, at least not that we know of. In terms of the social license to operate and environmental elements, and we're beginning to see this now in Mexico, I do expect that there will be increased regulation around these issues. And it's one of those elements where, it's hopefully that the legislation will keep in line with the international standards. But I do see that, the Mexican government at least will begin to, has already begun on some of these elements. Actually, we're seeing regulators apply more stringent standards to different companies in Mexico nationwide. We've seen them also resort to international law, international agreements that they have signed in order to look at how it is that they're dealing with different mining companies. And I don't expect that there will be a reversal in this. This is a push that is coming essentially from civil society. Like I said, they are extremely well organized, civil society extremely well organized. And I think that what the mining industry in Mexico will have to do is to find those spaces to begin to engage in dialogue at an industry level, with civil society, so that we can have something that is feasible for the industry, but that also, regulates and I guess guides some of these best practices, which again, I don't think they're going to necessarily reinvent the wheel. HRIAs are, now something that are carried out in different parts of the world by the mining industry. That were actually this is an element that was actually developed in collaboration with the mining industry in Canada. So it's not something that I think we should shy away from as an industry, but really look forward to it so that we can, create a better public image of what we do, because mining is necessary for all of the development that is going to happen in the next years.
Great.
Well, if this was a kind of a letter to Santa Claus, I'll be happy if we have a defined indigenous consultation law by 2050. That will be very helpful if we can have something a bit more solid there. So the rules are set up and we all follow what is stated there. To me, that will be a great support and a great looking. And I totally agree. I think technology, but I'll be also happy to ask Santa Claus for a bit of a better public understanding of what is mining. That will really help a lot, because we in the industry, we do understand it, but we are a very small, amount of people that actually understands it. So I will say that the general public is better informed, that we are able to communicate and to demonstrate how good ESG and how good mining does for communities and how it helps to boost, economic development social engagement, gender equality inside the communities that we work on. So that will be, for me, the best thing that we can get in those years.
Thank you. So I want to thank you, all of you. The discussion was great, amazing. I loved it. We got a lot of information about ESG in Mexico, how it works, where it's going. Thank you, Alberto, Ana, and Daniel. Whatever you need, please send me a message. We are very thankful that you accepted our invitation. Thank you to Christian and Arturo from Sonora and Guanajuato. And Doug, please, if you want to wrap up the event. We cannot hear you, Doug.
You're on mute, Doug.
Of course, one of the most famous sayings in 2021. Gabriela and all of you, just a great conversation. Learned so much, really great perspectives. Love the last question. I loved in particular Anna's bringing up the social issues and how important that is. And, you know, by the way, Anna, I think even in space, right? All these shows that show people going back and forth in space, there are plenty of social issues, right? You know, continuity of species and things like that, and how do people work together in closed quarters over long periods of time, et cetera, et cetera. So we have lots to handle, but the fact that you brought that up and the fact that historically the mining industry really hasn't totally gotten it, right? My family partly was part of the Kennecott mine, now Rio Tinto, the big copper mine in Salt Lake City, and there's a Greek town just outside there. And to some extent, right, the mining industry has taken care, quote unquote, of the social aspects of the miners. But we all know that kind of doesn't work out, generally as well as it should. So there's so much more progress that is to be made. A lot has been made, and thank you for bringing that up. But there's a lot more that needs to be made. And so when we think about 2050 in space or on the Earth, there's lots to think about, and there's lots of opportunity. So thank you for taking this first step with us in this conversation on mining in Mexico. It's a great topic, Gabriela. Thank you so much for bringing this up. And thanks everybody for attending. Have a great rest of your day. And for those of you celebrating, have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Gabi,
Thank
Doug,
Pleasure
Christian,
being here.
all the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure being here.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.